Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America, we bring the resource to you. The DU Podcast with your host, Chris Jennings.
Today I've got Dr. Tom Moorman, Ducks Unlimited's chief biologist, and Dr. Mike Brazier, a Ducks Unlimited waterfowl scientist here at National Headquarters. We're still talking duck numbers. Duck numbers just recently came out, and we're going species by species here, so bear with us. Today we're talking about the Gadwall, very significant species for North America, third or fourth highest harvest on average throughout North America. And this year, Gadwall came in at 3.2 million. That's almost the 10th highest on record, correct, Mike?
It is. It's the 10th highest number on record. And just to clarify, gray ducks for our South Louisiana comrades.
There you go. Perfect. Tom, do you want to make the Gadwall sound real quick for everyone?
I'll pass right now.
Sorry, he's been making Gadwall noises.
Yeah, Gadwall, the very important for hunters across the U.S., widely distributed, third or fourth most harvested bird on average, and it really is impressive when you look at Gadwall through the years. We've spoken about some of the other species in other podcasts and how the pond conditions in the southern prairie provinces were really going into 2 years of drought, and last year things were dry in the Dakotas, yet this species just continues to produce and just continues to impress. Presently, its population is 61% over the long-term average. I mean, if there's a bright spot in the breeding population survey, the report this year, clearly it's going to be Gadwall.
Yeah, and that really, I mean, I think when people looked at the chart that we sent out, I think that really jumped off to people. I saw people commenting about, hooray, Gadwall. People were just excited to see, that gray duck, numbers were strong.
Well, the other good thing about, this year for Gadwalls is they're pretty prone to dropping out on some of the first water they encounter. And so we know that southern prairie Canada is mostly dry, and Gadwalls that settle there probably will have less success. The good news is eastern Dakotas and western Montana pull in a lot of Gadwalls.
Yeah, 1.3 million.
Yeah, they'll settle in there, and they should have a really good year because there's quite a bit of water, and that usually translates to some pretty good duck production for that bird.
Awesome. Well, let's roll right down the list. American widgeon, very unique species. Came in this year on the survey at 2.8 million. 0% change from 2018, but it looks like widgeon numbers are still strong. 8% over the long-term average?
The thing that hunters should know about widgeon is this is a bird that breeds predominantly in the boreal forest, a little less in the prairies, actually a lot less in the prairies. Boreal forest to Canada and up into Alaska. And so if we look at boreal wetlands, traditionally they're a little bit more stable, a little bit more permanent, and so conditions there tend to be a little bit less variable. However, this year there is a little bit of a dry spot up there.
Yeah.
What that ultimately means for widgeon production is a little unclear. It's actually not that well studied of a bird overall. But, the population is, right at its long-term average. And this year, no change from last year. So they should be okay.
Yeah, and I was kind of happy to see widgeon sort of maintaining themselves. They were a species a few years ago where it kind of looked like they might have been following the trajectory of scaup, and thinking about they're both boreal nesters predominantly, and you thought maybe something was going on there. But widgeons seem to have kind of leveled off here, and so it's an important bird for the Pacific Flyway folks, so not too bad of a picture for widgeon this year.
Be the first to know when ducks are on the move. Sign up for DU's waterfowl migration email alerts and receive ongoing in-depth updates on the latest habitat conditions, weather changes, and hunting reports for your flyway. Visit ducks.org/migration alerts.
Next species, green-winged teal. A lot of hunters' favorite bird. Fantastic table fare as well. 2019, 3.1 million birds counted, which was 4% above the 2018 and 47% above the long-term average. Also one of the second highest really on long-term average there. That number gets people excited just to see that green wings are doing well.
Yep, another bird on a great population trajectory over time. Also another bird that breeds typically a little bit north of the prairies. They're what we would call a prairie parkland/boreal nester. Water conditions in that part of the world were a little better, at least in parts of the boreal and parts of the prairie parkland country. Also a big breeder in Alaska. And so taken together, Alaska was pretty dry this year, but the rest of that country was okay, and so population should at least hold its own.
Yeah, and the greenwing is really an interesting species. It's the smallest dabbling duck that we have, the smallest duck we have in North America, and yet it has this really northern breeding distribution, and that's probably something that a lot of folks don't truly appreciate. When you look at the breakdown of their numbers by survey region here, you have the boreal forest of the northern Alberta and British Columbia, and on up into the Northwest Territories, plus Alaska, accounting for over 2/3 of this population. Of this species.
Interesting thing about that bird is it tends to be a pretty late migrant for such a little guy. And, at least in our part of the world, Chris, where we hunt down here in Mississippi or Louisiana, Arkansas, greenwings show up in force usually in January.
Yeah.
It's an interesting bird. And, sometimes probably be good for future discussion, maybe to contrast greenwings and blue wings a little bit because they're really different.
Yeah, absolutely.
These species, the species that nest in the boreal forest, are a little more challenging to try to get a handle on productivity just because some of those survey areas are so large and breeding conditions can be so variable. And reading the report, that's one of the takeaways that I got from those survey regions. It's very variable across that area.
I think listeners, need to kind of get a better grasp of the habitat there in the boreal. I mean, what's that like? I mean, it's bogs, sloughs, and it's much more, it's very different from the prairies and probably really difficult to even survey.
Well, the survey transects, they're spread out further because it's such a big space and the relative density of waterfowl is a lot lower. But the size of the place alone and the number of wetlands it carries, typically we'll see 30% of the waterfowl production in North America coming out of there. The beauty of it is that it's pretty consistently wet. And so even if a prairie drought hits, the boreal can be counted on to kick out some ducks.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we've just talked about two species that are predominantly in that boreal forest region. So I'm just thinking about next year, maybe we can have a podcast on location in the boreal forest. Just something to thinking about.
That's what I'm talking about. Yeah, that sounds great. Well, hey, guys, I appreciate you joining us and going through these species. We're going to go through the next few, so everyone just join us on the next podcast. We'll start out with blue wings and go all the way down the list. Thanks, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.